After the Hole.
I played it innocent, a feel of discontent. I'm finally facing it all, fearless.
The loud knocking on my cell door took me by surprise. The words from one of the two prison guards on the other side took me even more by surprise. "Roll up your shit, you're out of here," he said. At first, I thought he was either confused or they were trying to antagonize me. They're often confused and equally often employ a sick and twisted sense of humor. This is coming from someone who also has a sick and twisted sense of humor. As they say, it takes one to know one. Hardly taking my eyes away from the page of the worn paperback I was 2/3 through reading, I replied, "You got the wrong guy. I'm on the next chain bus out of this shithole." 50% of my mind was sure that he had just knocked on the wrong cell door by mistake. 49.9% of my mind thought he wanted me to pack up my stuff and sit waiting for a release that never happened. I've had that happen to me before. A solid 0.1% wondered if I was really getting released back to general population. I had just spent the entire spring and half the summer locked away in solitary confinement, otherwise affectionately known as the hole. My understanding was the recommendation of every bigwig in my facility was to kick me out of the prison. Not everyone may know this, but a person can be kicked out of prison. Not kicked out as in set free, just sent to another prison. Unfortunately, there are always more prisons willing to accept me, at least for the next 4 decades I have left to serve. The cost for this particular trip to the hole and subsequent transfer recommendation was related to some confidential informants, aka rats, claimed that I was somehow plotting to spread mischief and mayhem around the facility. I had no idea at that time where that vicious rumor sprang from. Still, sitting on my bunk reading, I heard the knock again, followed by the words, "Are you refusing a directive?" Having had a decade and a half in prison at that time, I knew the meaning of those words. I knew their meaning and the certain repercussions involved for not heeding them. The 50% of my mind, which originally ascribed to the wrong cell door theory, quickly dismissed that option. I shifted that percentage to the trying to antagonize me column, now at 99.9%. I put down my book and walked to the door. There are a few magical phrases in prison. "Are you refusing a directive?" being one of them. Answering that question incorrectly typically leads to being tear gassed, handcuffed, and beaten, generally in that order. Eager to avoid such, I started packing. Refusal to follow a directive is basically a blank check for prison staff. It gives them an excuse to make a prisoner's life even more miserable. That level of power is quite often abused. There's no policy which says a prisoner has to hop on one foot and quack like a duck. That would be ridiculous. Even so, if a staff member gives you a directive to hop on one foot and quack like a duck, and you refuse, then you're guilty of refusing a directive. Refusing a directive while in general population plays out like this. You get pepper sprayed in the face and thrown to the ground. You get handcuffed, beaten, and then escorted to the hole. Refusing a directive while in the hole plays out like this. A large number of large individuals dressed in riot gear with helmets and shields will amass outside your cell. Tear gas will be sprayed in the cell. While you're choking and blinded, they will ram you with the oftentimes electrified shields, dogpile on top of you, handcuff you, and beat on you. After which, your cell will be stripped of everything including blankets, mattress, books, and toilet paper. You'll be stripped of your clothes and left naked in the empty cell. That not being my idea of a fun Friday night, and something I have previously experienced, I decided to comply with the directive. I could always unpack my stuff after they got their laughs. Also something I've previously experienced. I packed up the few meager possessions we were allowed to have while in the hole. A bar of soap, a comb, some writing paper, and the small amount of mail I've received. That made up the bulk of it. I stripped down my bunk, removing the sheet and blanket from the mattress. Then, as directed, I stripped off my clothes, removing the coveralls, socks, shirt, and underwear I was wearing. The cuff port in the cell door opened, and I passed out everything except the mattress. Standing there completely naked, bathed in the light of two high-power flashlights, I went through the strip search procedure familiar to prisoners everywhere. I showed my hands, front and back. I opened my mouth, moving my tongue and using my right hand to peel back my lips. I lifted my arms to show my armpits. The next step was to lift and separate my genitals, which I did with my left hand. Much as expected, one of the guards said, "Let me see your mouth again." Having seen this move, I again showed my mouth and used my right hand to again peel back my lips. The purpose on the part of the guard was to have me go from touching my genitals to touching my mouth with the same hand, a crude but common tactic they employ. Following the second examination of my mouth, I turned around and lifted each of my feet in succession. Then I bent at the hips and spread my ass cheeks for their viewing pleasure. I could feel the beam of the flashlights, illuminating the most intimate regions of my body. I held this pose until directed to stop. In my mind, this was the tipping point between two possible outcomes. They could give me my stuff back and laughingly slam the cuffboard closed, or they could give back my coveralls and put handcuffs on me. When only the coveralls came back through the cuffboard and I was told to cuff up, I knew the answer. I really was being released back to general population. After 75 days alone in the static, repetitive realm that is the hole, I was being thrown back into the chaotic and ever-changing world of general population. Making that mental shift had my mind reeling as I backed up to be handcuffed through the cuffboard. Going to the hole typically involves a fair amount of mental trauma that a person needs to process. You get ripped away from every aspect of the life you have been living. You also have time to adjust, adapt, and process that reality alone in an empty cell. The solitude and certainty of the situation grounds your mind to what is. Getting out of the hole involves a fair amount of mental trauma as well. You're again being ripped away from every aspect of the life you have been living. The difference is you have virtually no time to process the situation. Adjusting, adapting, and processing must be done on the fly. The uncertainty of the situation has your mind in the clouds of what might be. I barely felt the pressure of the handcuffs as they tightened around my wrists. Even the once familiar weight of the steel against my skin felt changed. My mind raced with dozens of questions I wanted to ask the two guards, most of which they would be unable to answer, the rest of which they would simply be unwilling to answer. Their job was just to escort me from that cell to a holding cell, nothing more. As I was being marched to the holding cell, there was a face in the window of practically every cell door. Many were asking me where I was going, or asking me to tell someone something. Seeing a fellow prisoner leaving the hole is often a bittersweet affair. You're happy enough for them, but you jealously wish it was you leaving. When I got to the holding cell, the dozens of questions in my mind boiled down to the two most pressing. Who were they going to try to put me in the cell with? What housing unit was I going to? The handcuffs were removed and the strip search process was repeated. This time, there was no double back to my mouth. Rather than passing the coveralls back to me, I was given a plastic bag which contained the clothing I had been wearing when I went to the hole 75 days before. That was a rainy afternoon in April, and I had just returned to my housing unit after a workout in the gym. Several cops were lying in wait for me as I entered the unit. I got pushed up against the wall and tightly handcuffed without explanation. They escorted me to the hole, made me strip naked, and put my clothes in a plastic bag. The same unwashed shorts, t-shirt, boxers, and socks were waiting in that same plastic bag on the mid-July evening I got released. Need I describe the musty smell? There's nothing quite like it, I can tell you that. The horrible fragrance aside, I was happy for the fact that I, once again, had my own clothes to put on. There's an indescribable feeling of comfort to knowing that your ass was ever the only ass in a pair of underwear. Perhaps the most indescribable feeling is knowing that many, many other asses have been in the pair of underwear you're wearing. You don't have your own clothes while housed in the hole like you do in general population. While in the hole, you get a used pair of underwear, socks, and a t-shirt. You can exchange them on a one-on-one basis for more used clothing 4 times per week when you're allowed to shower. I came up with a mathematical formula for approximating how many asses have been in a pair of underwear before mine. These are the things that you ponder while in the hole. The formula is A equals B divided by 2. A being the number of asses previously in the pair of underwear, and B being the number of balls. Of course, A is an absolute, everyone has an ass, whereas B is a variable, as not everyone has a pair of balls. Once I was properly attired in my musty gym clothes, I had a few minutes to wait in the holding cell while my release paperwork got processed. The questions of which unit I was going to and with whom they would try to sell me up with were foremost in my thoughts. Those seemingly insignificant variables would absolutely affect the success or failure of my A and Bs to stay in general population. In this facility, there are 7 housing units for general population: H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, and G unit. Each housing unit has 2 pods. Given an option, which I wasn't, I would have chosen to go back to H4. My last choice, if given one, would be H1, specifically the H1B pod. I mentally ran through who I remembered being in which unit and which pod when I'd gone to the hole. I had people I knew and kinsmen in every unit. The one place where I didn't know anybody was H1B pod. H1 was more or less a dumping ground for prisoners that other units wanted to offload. It is also the closest unit to the medical building. Those factors tend to dictate the makeup of the H1 population to a certain degree. I was less than excited when the guards came back with my new housing assignment, H1B45U. While that may seem like indecipherable alphanumeric gibberish to you, I understood every digit completely. H1 unit, B pod, cell number 45, which is on the bottom tier, upper bunk. As far as locations go, that is about as bad as it gets. Having my destination set, the prospect of who would be in the cell when I got there became my sole concern. Unlike a lot of offenders these days, I won't live with just anyone. I understand that I can't always choose who I will live with. The Department of Corrections, power that be, make those decisions. I do, however, have the unilateral authority to decide who I will not live with.